Y vamos a pasar ahora a la tercera charla de esta segunda mesa que va a estar a cargo de Kevin King y de Cris Hernández. Voy a leer sus semblanzas. Ellos nos van a presentar un trabajo titulado Typotheque Indigenous North America Type. Kevin King es diseñador de tipografías, tipógrafo, calígrafo y también es investigador tipográfico radicado en Canadá. Tras trabajar en Coach House Press y Canada Type, ambos en Toronto, obtuvo su maestría en diseño tipográfico con distinción en la Universidad de Reading, en Reino Unido, en 2018. Su trabajo se centra en el soporte tipográfico y la investigación para lenguas minoritarias, colaborando directamente con comunidades indígenas de Norteamérica para apoyar sus esfuerzos de revitalización y preservación lingüística. A través de su colaboración con Typotheque, ha contribuido a la estandarización de la escritura de los silabarios canadienses unificados en el estándar Unicode, mediante la incorporación de nuevos caracteres y la revisión de glifos representativos. Además de su trabajo en diseño tipográfico, mantiene una práctica activa en caligrafía, impartiendo talleres y conferencias sobre ambos temas, tanto en Canadá y en Europa, y ahora con nosotros. Cris Hernández es diseñador de tipografías e investigador radicado en Brooklyn, Nueva York. Su práctica profesional se centra en el apoyo a lenguas indígenas y sistemas de escritura de América del Norte, con énfasis en lenguas digitalmente desfavorecidas. Obtuvo su certificado de posgrado en diseño tipográfico en The Copper Union en 2019. Es fundador de Que Queda Type, una fundidora dedicada a la creación de tipografías inclusivas y accesibles. Además, colabora con el proyecto Typotheque Indigenous North American Type, contribuyendo a la estandarización y representación tipográfica de lenguas indígenas en el estándar de Unicode. A través de su trabajo, Hernández busca fortalecer la visibilidad y el acceso digital de lenguas indígenas, promoviendo su preservación y revitalización mediante el diseño tipográfico. Así que les damos la más cordial bienvenida, Kevin, Cris, un placer tenerlos por acá y estamos ansiosos por oírlos. Gracias.
Gracias, Mariana. Un placer.
Gracias.
¿Pueden presentar pantalla?
Sí, perdón. And I'm going to be in English, but I do speak Spanish.
No problem.
Okay, great. Hello, and thank you for having us. Before we begin, we would like to begin by acknowledging that this presentation occurs on the unceded territories of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, as well as the homeland of the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe nations. My name is Cris Hernández. I'm presenting today alongside my colleague, Kevin King. We'll be presenting about the complexities of typographic representation in North America and sharing case studies from work we've been involved in through Typotheque's ongoing North American Indigenous Research Project. So, as our two other colleagues, Bridget Chase and Leo Vicente, shared, North America is an incredibly diverse place. This is true both linguistically, but also orthographically, in the many writing systems that are used by each respective community. Within a single language, there are often many varieties, or what some may call dialects, many of which may use different writing systems. This language map reflects our starting point. We're still in the process of understanding. It's clear now that many more writing systems are in use than we first captured. As we discussed in the previous session, in order to move into more complex technological advancements, communities need to ensure that they have access to full Unicode representation for their orthography, access to functional and thoughtfully designed keyboards, and access to typefaces that accurately and respectfully render their orthographies. I will be highlighting some of the specific challenges and considerations we've encountered in our research. So to start, what writing systems exist? Here's a glimpse of the diversity and unique contexts that communities are working within. Our team is primarily focused within the Latin script, otherwise known as Roman, phonetic-derived syllabics, and Senshaden at the bottom. So here's an example of a text from the Hamalco language, which would fall under phonetic-derived. It includes phonetic, Greek, and modifier letters, all of which are already supported by Unicode. For characters not yet supported, Unicode encoding is essential to enable widespread and consistent use. Heltzuk, which Kevin will discuss in more detail, provides an example where uppercase forms of certain characters were only just recently added to Unicode. Additionally, the lowercase Greek lambda, a character from outside the Latin block, now has their own Latin code point. And when we talk about keyboard layouts, we are referring to the arrangement of keys on a keyboard, which determines how characters and functions are accessed. To type characters that are not available on a standard English keyboard, a virtual keyboard, a program that reorganizes the characters on your physical keyboard, is needed, along with a font that can render them correctly. But it's important to note that even if you have all of your characters encoded into the Unicode standard, the core OS fonts may not yet support the rendering of these characters, especially if those characters have been recently added and published in Unicode. So take, for example, the top text set in Apple's SF Pro, which demonstrates the noticeable differences and issues with rendering combining marks. In this case, the primary issue stems from the absence of anchors and characters such as the lowercase x, which is commonly excluded, leading to misaligned combining marks. This is largely because diacritic support across Latin letters is quite uneven. While some letters have precomposed combinations encoded in Unicode, others, like lowercase x, do not, requiring additional steps such as combining sequences to function properly. And as you can see, the A caron is only one Unicode code point, and the X with caron is 2. Though even commonly supported letters aren't exempt, diacritics like comma above are rarely precomposed, so additional work is still needed to render them correctly across. Here's an example of stacking diacritics from 2 North American languages, showing just how essential proper positioning and shaping is for reading and writing clearly. Returning to confusables, we've also observed overlapping usage patterns involving combining minus sign below, macron below, and combining low line. This overlap arises from a combination of factors. In many cases, the choice of characters is shaped by what is accessible on a user's keyboard or input method, particularly when standard orthographic tools are unavailable. In other situations, users may rely on visually similar characters that are easier to find in fonts or more widely supported across platforms. We are currently addressing 3 visually similar diacritics that appear in use across different communities. Due to technical and historical reasons, some communities may use more than one of these diacritics in different contexts. On a slightly different note, we're also documenting community preferences for individual characters, such as the stroked lambda on the left. Here is another example of a community preference in action for Haranashawni, which features a modified ogonek and modifier glottal stop. And before I pass it over to Kevin, I'd like to briefly talk about Sinshaden. Sinshaden employs a unicase writing system that, aside from a few exceptions, exclusively uses capital letters in Latin. As a result, it can appear visually larger when set alongside writing systems that include lowercase forms. To help balance this, we've included a small caps feature as an alternative.
Great.
And that's for me. So I'll pass it on to Kevin. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Chris. That was wonderful. And I'm going to pop my screen up. And I don't know if it'll kick. Yeah, there you go. And just going to make sure that the keynotes there. Okay. Okay. And everybody sees just a case study one,
Yes.
Tanaka. Okay, so Chris, thank you so much for that wonderful sharing those wonderful aspects about the work that our team has been doing. And I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to work um, with someone as skilled as Chris, but also with our other teammates, Leo Vicenti, Bridget Chase, Mark Turin, and Clarissa Forbes, on this project that we've created at Typotheque, which has been, as Chris described so well, and Leo and Bridget also described earlier, which is to work in partnership with First Nations and Inuit communities in North America to understand where barriers might exist and to also get a sense of where we can help and deliver meaningful impact for the communities that help their language revitalization programs. So what I'd like to do to complement Chris's first half is to show some case studies briefly of where we've worked with different communities in terms of an implementation level. So what do we do with that research once we've cultivated it through partnership and dialogue and work together with communities? How do we implement that? And the first case study is for a language that is in southern British Columbia, as well as, I believe, northern Idaho, Tanaka. And this is a slightly different approach that I worked on myself. With Typotheque, we were approached by uh, the community and they were working on a magazine and they wanted to have language support for their language, their orthography. Um, for a magazine, they were creating a cultural magazine. And so they needed fonts that supported the unique rendering requirements that Chris shared earlier. Um, when I started to investigate the language support for Naka, it would be the same as investigating any other language, even if it's for a Latin script, which I understand very well. There are many requirements that, as Chris shared, that are unique to typical type design for European origin languages, such as characters that derive from phonetic notation systems, Greek characters, and the use of dynamic combining diacritic marks. But something else that comes up a lot, and shout out to our teammate Bridget Chase for creating a wonderful confusables data list that is such a helpful resource. That's something that popped out right away is that, oh, in Naka's orthography, there are actually multiple ways to input similar characters. And that's something that I need to know as someone building a font. You can see the difference where this is actually here, a phonetic, an IPA character. And in fact, in Naka, there are two different sets being used. There's the cent character, which is not a letter technically in Unicode, versus a C-stroke character, which is classified as a letter in the Unicode standard. And there's also I believe this is it represents a click in languages and IPA transcription on the top line, and then there's a double stroke letter character. Now, the difference is that, and I need to know this as a type designer so that I can either accommodate both methods of input that are being actively used in the community. And the difference between those comma marks was the fact that there are actually two slightly different combining comma marks. As a type designer, I need to know, I need to first of all know how these marks work on a Unicode basis and how to implement them in a font. But the critical piece that our project is doing and why it's important is that we work in partnership with communities to understand what they need their orthographies to do in Unicode text, and is there a situation where we need to make any changes, perhaps, and how do we guide through that process together? Um, or are things actually working just fine, and we just need to accommodate that in the font? And that's where community partnership and working on this together matters, is because we're not just making speculative decisions when we get to this font level. And in fact, in this project, we were asking questions to the Language Commission. Is this the character that works better? Is this how this character should look? The other thing is that in the font design space, a font designer has a responsibility working in this context to make sure that the font reveals the truth, if it makes sense, and that is the identity of the characters. So I could make a decision here to have made these characters, these lowercase c with a slash, I could make them be graphically identical. And I have the ability to do that. I can just draw the cent sign exactly like the C stroke or vice versa. However, I think that we have a responsibility to actually reveal the truth of that in the font, even though I could have easily done that for this font for a magazine. If that font starts getting used in other cases, it's going to create many confusable text situations where the data is different. So there's a data inconsistency that will cause all kinds of problems for the community later. But the problem is human readers won't see that inconsistency. However, as we've implemented it here, they will, the reality of the characters will be exposed. Same thing with this character. The other thing you notice is that those IPA characters don't have a capital case pair, but Naka requires such a pairing. They need to be able to uppercase letters and lowercase them. And you can't do that with those IPA characters because IPA is lowercase only. So what we ended up delivering after doing work and having discussions, we arrived at fonts that were tailored specifically for Naka readers that expose that reality of the character identities. And what it gives them is a tool that they can use beyond the magazine that allows the community to keep working towards their language revitalization goals. And they can make decisions about the orthography as they need to, but there's no masking over the identity of the characters. And in fact, this is something that we do, that we can do in a font context, is we can have a standard build that you see on the default side on the left, and we can actually issue easily, once we've drawn the characters, a customized, localized version of the font. Now, with Typotheque, our team worked in partnership under a memorandum of understanding with Typotheque Revitalization. And in particular, I worked with Nahingai no, and we worked with Nahingai no at the Language Center in order to first add new characters. So after we had a partnership together, we addressed the issue of missing capital letters in the Unicode standard, which this writing system was missing. Once we were able to do that, and we could solve this issue of going from a Greek letter to a Greek capital letter, we could actually go from a lowercase Latin lambda to a capital lambda. We were able to deliver fonts through this partnership after we solved these technical problems, and we're able to give them more of a diversity to their typographic palette. And I'm going to move past this one for the sake of time. It was just showing those fonts in action. Now, with the Dakith community, this is the syllabics writing system. In fact, they use two writing systems today. They have been traditionally using a syllabics writing system since the 1880s. And Guy and Dennis, who you saw on the first page, are the language keepers that I worked with to change the representation of their characters at the Unicode standard level. Many of us who are font designers here might be familiar with going to the Unicode charts to look at a general identity of characters, and that makes sense. That's what the code chart should be for. But they were not correct for Dacath. So what we did is we were successful to propose a change to those character representatives, not to add new characters. And now what Dacath is able to do, not just with our fonts, but now there are other even core system fonts being updated to support this, is that they can have their syllabics and their Latin script orthography represented in the way that they determine it should appear, how their typography should appear. The final case study is for the Naturally community. And for myself personally, the Naturally community is the first community that I began working with on their syllabics, and they were missing these 12 characters from Unicode. They simply had no way to input them in Unicode text, and that poses a huge barrier because you simply just can't use them on any device and can't exchange the text reliably. The local representation here came up during our work together when elders were saying it's really difficult to read this character. It gets confused with other forms. For our local typography, it would be better if it looked the way that you see on the right side, so that it's not confusable. And so Tamalik and Arniuk are the two elders that I worked closest with in the Naturally community on this particular work. After we added the characters, we went further to carry out surveys to take a democratic approach to say how do fluent language speakers view these two forms, and it was identified that it should be this version on the right. The other thing that was a big step that we wouldn't have known if we didn't work together with community was the impact of kerning on syllabics typefaces. It actually makes a dramatic improvement to legibility and readability. But it's something that has not been implemented on most syllabics typefaces before this time. When I showed this sample, this is a similar sample that I showed to Tamalik, she said, why have people not been kerning our fonts before? Because it makes a really big difference. And we do look at things like adding more expressive dimensions to a typographic palette. So an example of syllabics handwriting, this is from 1843, Cris syllabics handwriting. And what we've done is we work together, even across huge geographic spaces. It's very difficult to get to the Arctic. So we use the internet and a web platform to be able to test fonts relatively in real time. We could serve a new font version, and we could have sessions where we made changes. Okay, that's the end of my part. And thank you very much. Muchas gracias. And I hope that that provides a kind of look at what happens, complementing as well the talk that Bridget and Leo gave. But what do we do in terms of taking that research and applying a practical impact to tools? And I'll switch
Thank
back.
you very much, Kevin and Cris. It was a wonderful presentation, combined presentations with a lot of information for us and too many, I think, ideas to apply in our for our languages, for our cases, especially in not only in the technological side, but also in the final of your presentation, in the way that interact and to choose the delivery of the fonts with the native people, the speakers, the artistic or visual or more, yes, the dimension of the artistic way to explain typography. Was a wonderful experience to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gracias.